From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today, K-State's Jaymelynn Farney with us to discuss the idea of patch burning as an alternative approach to prescribed pasture burning. She explains how the system works and what K-State research says about cattle performance on patch-burned pastures. She'll also talk about new K-State research on the system's impact on carbon emissions from grazing cattle. Then K-State's Justin Waggoner, covering several principles of mineral nutrition management for cattle on grass. He'll talk about the value of knowing what levels of those key minerals are actually being provided to the herd. And on this week's Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven will be mic side to share special news for you listeners. Here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we're glad to have you aboard once again. And we've several items of interest for you beef cattle producers during our first half hour today. The first is an approach to prescribed pasture burning that's gaining a little more attention each and every year. Patch burning, as it's called for short. Along with us is beef systems specialist Jaymelynn Farney of K-State Research and Extension. She's based in southeast Kansas. Patch burning has been an option on the table for a while. It's been discussed and examined by producers, by researchers. Jaymelynn, what is meant by patch burning pasture land?
Well, patch burning, as the name kind of indicates, is you only burn a patch or a portion of the pasture in one given year, and you rotate it through however many years you plan on setting up your strategy. And it's set up as an alternative to complete burning of your pasture. One of the most common patch burning systems is to set up your pasture in 3 parts. And you burn a third of it in year 1, the middle third in year 2, and the final third in year 3. And then in year 4, go back and burn that first third. So that way you have some very freshly burned area of the pasture while also having other components out there. Some of the benefits of that patch burning, when it was first really investigated, was as a method to improve diversity of your rangeland.
When you say diversity, you're suggesting different kinds of grazable species might develop over time in this system?
That is correct, Eric. One of the reasons we like to burn is it is a way to effectively control invasive plants. Applying strategic fire can help you reduce those plant populations. Well, at the same time, when you're applying the same fire year after year, you will impact what plant species are there, and sometimes you might be reducing some of your desirable plants. When you allow some rest periods, you can allow those more fragile plants, for lack of a better word, to have the chance. Some of them need 2 years to recoup from a stress of fire to be able to go into reproductive phase. And that is one thing that they find, especially in the patch burning, the 3-year rotation, some of our more desirable forbs that are both good from a cattle intake perspective, but also from a whole ecosystem, your pollinators, as well as our wildlife.
Cattle by nature will graze the freshest grass out there. So the worry that the traditionalist might come to is, will certain parts, the parts that are burned, be overgrazed within this system?
Interestingly enough, I was involved in a 7-year study there at Yates Center, where we did the patch burning on a 3-year basis, did a 90-day double stalk grazing with our cattle. And we found that we did change our biodiversity a little bit. We did see that little blue stem and Indian grass tended to decrease, but Cerisa lespedeza also decreased using this patch burn system. So we did see a little bit of composition change with that 7-year study. But from a cattle gain perspective, we actually saw that we did not negatively affect cattle performance as compared to a continuous or every year pasture burn. And actually, in years when we had drought, and over that 7-year study, we had 2 years where our growing season precipitation was about half of what it usually is, we saw that those cattle on patch burn pastures actually gained more than our cattle that were on the continuous burn pasture. And if you think about that, just like you'd said, the cattle prefer to go to the greenest, luscious, newest plants out there, which will be in your patch burn section. But then they'll start going and grazing in that stuff that had burned the 2nd year. And then, finally the part that had been burned in that 3rd year. Well, if you burned everything off and you had a drought, there's nothing for the cattle to eat. Whereas in your patch burn, they still have appreciable amount of biomass to eat from that 2 years ago or 3 years ago burn, which provides you, and here in Kansas, we always have to have some drought plans in our back pocket. Right. Patch burning could provide you that option. We've also found in other areas of the country, folks that don't burn versus doing patch burning, because, not every part of the country likes to burn near as much as we do in, say, the tall grass native range of Kansas. Patch burning does result in greater cattle gains as compared to no burning at all. So, like I said, if you're looking at it from a drought perspective, a little bit of burning is better than none.
And in these trials, you're talking about growing calves now, correct? Stockers?
That is correct. That study that I talked about we did was with growing cattle, stockers, and 2 of them that I'd mentioned that were some cross timber rangeland out of Oklahoma was also with stockers, where they had unburned versus patch burn and saw an improvement in cattle gains.
Bringing that up because you say cow-calf herds can also thrive in patch burn systems?
They do, and the data that I've really found has been mostly out of Nebraska, where they've looked at some patch burning versus non-burned areas. And they do see that their cows do come off a little heavier after that. Don't really see much of a difference in body condition, but, it takes a lot of extra groceries to change some body condition. But the calves off of that spring herd also weaned off in this one example from winter and others, 50 pounds heavier in patch burned pastures as compared to unburned. So your cows look better coming off of grass, calves weigh a little more, and you can potentially do some improved production on your diversity and quality of your pasture ground.
Now, Jaymelynn, there's another angle on this that actually has been researched here at Kansas State University. You contributed to this study looking at one particular effect of patch burning, and you say for those producers out there who are eyeing the future and the possibility of carbon credits being availed to producers, depending on how policy goes here, well, this is something they might want to know about. Talk about that.
Yes, and just another little point of clarification. I was peripherally involved with a multi-million-dollar CAP grant, but Dr. Chuck Rice was the main component of this, and we included it in a publication that we talked about alternative burning strategies. They did a multiple-year study there around Manhattan, looking at a cow-calf system in regards to greenhouse gas emissions, like nitrous oxide and methane, and looked at patch burning versus annual burning. It was a patch burn on a 3-year rotation. Like I said, it seems like that's what most people do, is about a 3-year patch burning. And they stocked the cows at 1 cow-calf pair per roughly 8 acres. They had cows on annual pasture, and then those are annually burned pasture, and then those that were on patch burning. Within that first year of patch burning, 90% of the methane emissions from the beef cattle on that cow-calf pair on the annual were essentially sunk, a carbon sink, back into the production environment instead of going into the air. That was after 1 year. 63% of it after 2 years of burning. So burning of pastures, especially that patch burning, is definitely a method to offset carbon emissions from a cow-calf operation. Now, we all know in the cattle industry, cattle provide such a small footprint from greenhouse gas emissions. It's not like that 90% is going to have a huge effect. But when we're talking potential carbon credits and potential dollars and legislation coming back down, anything we can do to quantify how our annual burning, the soil capture, sequestration of these different carbon elements is a great management practice to have in our toolbox.
Good information to have in pocket for sure, as those possibilities might come down the line here in the future. We shall see on that. And tell us finally about this report called Alternative Burning Strategies, which summarizes work done here in Kansas by you and colleagues, as well as in the states of Oklahoma and Tennessee. Where can one find that particular report?
This report can be found on the K-State bookstore, and it's Alternative Burning Strategies, Effects on Cattle, Performance, Grassland, and the Environment. If you can't remember to go look on our bookstore, just Google Alternative Burning Strategies in Kansas State University, and you can find the publication.
Good reading if this is an approach that interests you producers on patch burning pasture. Alternative burning strategies, as Jaymelynn says, you can simply search for it by title or go to the K-State Research and Extension bookstore directly online. Jaymelynn, thanks for going over this with us, and we'll get together again soon.
I enjoyed it, Eric, just like I do every time.
Jaymelynn Farney is a beef systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. She's based in southeast Kansas. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Continuing on now on this Agriculture Today, we'll talk more about a management consideration for cattle going to grass, this time mineral nutrition management. And we brought in Justin Waggoner. Justin is the beef systems specialist for K-State Research and Extension in southwest Kansas. Before we get into particulars here, Justin, when we think about nutritional considerations for cattle heading out to pasture here soon, where do the minerals rank in that pecking order, so to say?
You know, I think, Eric, the answer to that question, there's probably some difference of opinions. But, you know, a lot of times for me as a nutritionist, I tend to think of minerals as being, you know, kind of a tertiary ranking, if you will, kind of falling in the third slot. You know, the large rocks or the larger issues for me tend to be, you know, energy and protein status, and then that's closely followed by the mineral program that's behind that as we look at cow herd nutrition. Now, I'm for sure not saying that minerals are not important and they're not an important component of beef cattle nutrition. We just have to realize, you know, they function as cofactors. They are essential, but they're not going to be necessarily the silver bullet for any of those larger problems that might be associated with energy or protein status or maybe even some management issues that have come up throughout the production cycle.
That said, though, producers oftentimes purchase a commercial product, they dump it into the mineral feeder and walk away and refill as necessary. You would like to see it be a little more specified than that?
Well, you know, I think I always kind of find that interesting because that is a lot of producers' approaches to their mineral program is it's kind of a let's buy a sack of something that fits and let's put it out and hope the cows consume it. Mineral nutrition is one of the areas of beef cattle nutrition where I still feel like we have some knowledge gaps. Our knowledge is somewhat incomplete. We don't know everything. It's also very complicated. That's the other piece of it. So there's two ends of the spectrum. I often tell producers we need to have a good mineral program, but there is a point where we can begin to overthink it a little bit. And so there's a spot for us in the middle that I think would, for a lot of folks, that makes some sense. So, what
constitutes that spot in the middle then? What factors should producers focus on in their mineral supplementation plan?
So I think the first thing is to have a good understanding of just mineral nutrition in general. And so, as I kind of think about mineral nutrition, we often think of those deficiencies that are out there is kind of where we start. And, a lot of times we don't see a lot of those overt clinical deficiencies of hair loss and those kind of things. The impacts of the mineral program that we do see are often quite a bit more subtle. Some reduced fertility, maybe some reduced immunity. Those are the ones that we see a little bit more often. As we talk a little bit more in depth about mineral nutrition, we have macro minerals and we have micro minerals or trace minerals. And so the terminology in the name essentially gives it away. The macro minerals, typically those are going to be expressed as a percentage of the diet. Those are the classic ones that we look for. They're going to be listed at the top of the tag on the mineral sack: the calcium, the phosphorus, the magnesium, the potassium, the sodium, chlorine, sulfur, etc. Those are the macro minerals. So we think percent of the diet. And, obviously if they're required in larger percentages, there is some level of, we absolutely need a little bit more of those in the diets. As you get into the next category, those trace or those micro minerals, that's where we get into the classics of the copper, zinc, selenium, etc. We know a lot of those are going to be expressed in parts per million. That's why you see that difference, between percentage and parts per million of the diet. I think the other thing that surprises just a lot of producers is that there are only 17 minerals that are required in the diets of cattle. I believe there's 23 that we've identified that we know are important, but we only have established requirements for 17. So that tends to point a little bit to some of those knowledge gaps that are out there. And so the other thing is, I understand we have, macro minerals, we have micro minerals. Both of them are essential in the diet. But the other thing that makes mineral nutrition maybe a little more complicated in a sense is that mineral status within an animal is not just about what you delivered in that sack or you put in the mineral feeder. It's a function of the total diet. So not only do we have to take into account, what's the mineral that's coming in from the forage resources, what are we getting from our mineral supplementation, but another area that is often one of the greatest challenges that we face is the mineral content of the water.
And that's a variable that can be all over the map, can't it?
Yes, it's very difficult. I mean, if we think about water intake, we've talked about that on this program and how that can change with cow, stage of production as well as weather and ambient temperature requirements. And then you top in water quality, and then as you get into, especially in the western half of the state, where we have some antagonisms that can occur as well as a result of the water that those cattle are drinking, we've taken that mineral program that was pretty simple in terms of, hey, let's just put out a sack of a good quality mineral and it's going to cover most of our needs. It becomes a little bit more complicated if we've got some significant antagonisms, sulfur, iron, et cetera, that might be out there and that we do have out there. The other factor we get into is, the forage content of mineral is always changing as those forages go through their cycle. Warm season versus cool season, we can look at that a lot of different ways, but yet again, another variable into this mineral program. And so, we talk about, well, there's some beauty in simplifying the program. And so the way a lot of commercial mineral supplements are formulated today is they just simply meet or exceed most of those animals' requirements. And, quite honestly, that's not a bad approach. I mean, historically, minerals were relatively cheap. We could argue that different components of a mineral mix are no longer cheap. We do see some fluctuations there. It is an expenditure for cow-calf operators, and so I think it's something we need to make sure that we're, meeting our needs or getting the right things out of it. And so if we take those products, and deficiencies are probably pretty unlikely. But the other end of the coin is, what's the benefit of providing higher than the requirements as well? And so there's kind of that two sides of, we don't want to underfeed, we don't want to be below the requirements, but yet, is there a benefit or, is there not a benefit associated with feeding a higher level of a particular nutrient in some cases? So we certainly shouldn't take it for granted. It warrants some consideration, especially as we look at some of those variables. The water quality especially, I think, is an important consideration. And, just being aware of, one, basic mineral nutrition, as well as some of those variables that can come into, what can impact that mineral program and what product that we might need to choose that's going to fit our situation the best.
So far, you've been talking about mineral composition here, but what about the presentation of the product? And along with that, assuring that there is intake of the mineral. Any tricks to the trade there?
Well, I wish I could say yes. The thing that I always recommend to producers is to have some idea of what the consumption is. One of my favorite questions to ask folks is, did you actually read the mineral tag? And there's some really important information at the bottom of that tag. And that particular piece of information is the consumption or the target consumption. Is it a product that's to be delivered as a 2 ounce per head per day, a 4 ounce per day? What is the target consumption of this particular product? And then, that kind of dovetails into okay, how much mineral are you feeding? And on an average spectrum of time, a couple weeks, are we close to that target? You talk about different ways to present it. There's lots of different ways we can approach that, right? But I think that the bigger part for me is making sure that we're documenting the intake, finding out where we're at in that. And then if, we're not anywhere, if we're under, we certainly need to maybe look at altering course. There's lots of different ways to deliver mineral. We've got, a loose mineral supplement that we can put out in a mineral feeder. We can also put that mineral package in a small amount of supplement or feed. That's very common as we get into the winter months on cow herd. Stocker operations do that quite a bit as well. There's probably, just like with any other supplementation program, the base assumption is that the animal consumes the right amount of the product. And we know that there's variability around that. We also know that there's probably a high percentage of cows in a herd that may never consume any mineral at all. That's what some of the data indicates, that there can be a certain degree of non-consumers within a particular herd setting.
That said, producers, as they plan, need to think about what can they do to smooth out that consumption, so to say, make it more uniform amongst the herd, to what degree they can anyway. At least give that due thought upon presentation as well as product selection.
Yeah, it all starts with documenting that, and then depending on whether we're over-consuming or under-consuming, then, we've kind of got two pathways that we can go down to maybe look at either increasing the consumption of the product or maybe even in some cases, trying to moderate that consumption a bit.
Well, producers, we are still a few weeks ahead of turnout for most of our grazing programs here in Kansas, spring and summer grazing, that is. If you haven't considered how you'll approach the mineral side of the nutrition program for those animals on grass, it's probably high time to do so. And as Justin says, utilize the information on that product label to come to conclusions on how you'll carry out your mineral program. Justin, as always, we appreciate the input. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Justin Waggoner is a beef systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension out of Southwest Kansas. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back after the break here on the K-State Radio Network.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
In its 97th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains, this is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Next, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Economic opportunity for farmers may be significant in addressing climate change, but the ranking member on the Senate Agriculture Committee said yesterday that the USDA and federal lawmakers should take a cautious approach to developing programs. Senator John Boozman of Arkansas said during the AgriPulse Ag and Food Policy Summit that whether a future includes a carbon bank, expanded conservation, or other measures, farmers need to have a seat at the head of the climate table. Complicating the potential opportunity, he said, is finding the best methods for measuring and verifying the carbon sequestered on farms or greenhouse gas reductions associated with certain agricultural practices. Boozman added that experimental practices designed to address climate change through agriculture may be difficult or cost prohibitive for farmers to adopt. He said that not only will it'll be important to have a firm understanding of the carbon markets, but also on how the proposed policies might affect developing markets and agricultural stakeholders. Though the USDA under the Biden administration is considering the establishment of a carbon bank, Boozman said that the information on that is lacking. Whether a carbon bank is developed for farmers and ranchers may come down to a debate in Washington about whether the agency has the authority to use the Commodity Credit Corporation for establishing such a bank. On Monday, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack said that the CCC is under consideration for that purpose. Now, a spokesperson for Senate Agriculture Committee Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow told DTN that Stabenow's Climate Smart Solutions Act, as it's called, which would create a carbon certification program at USDA, is a bipartisan bill that the senator wants enacted. Advocates for farmers in Congress stress that any carbon program must reward the early adopters. A lot of farmers have been doing things like minimum till, cover crops, and been doing it for years, in some cases decades. They deserved credit for what they've already been doing for carbon capture. That, the words of Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. U.S. and agricultural commodity organizations continue to press the Biden administration on agricultural trade issues with Mexico, calling for continued action on implementation of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. The groups highlighted several existing and emerging friction points in U.S.-Mexico ag trade relations, including actions related to biotech crops, organics, and market access. The groups noted that biotech crop issues and Mexico's actions on glyphosate are significant issues and create a significant risk and uncertainty to cross-border trade of corn and corn products. The groups also noted that U.S. dairy market access to Canada remains an issue that needs to be addressed. The group's letter came as newly installed U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai held virtual discussions with her Canadian counterpart on USMCA and other issues. USDA's rural development is investing now hundreds of millions of dollars to help rural communities build and improve essential facilities, especially for health care. The USDA's Stephanie Ho has more.
USDA is investing nearly $300 million to help improve rural community facilities and essential services in 16 states and Puerto Rico. More than half of the funding is for rural health care and emergency response services.
The virus has probably hit all of us in one form or another, but it has hit rural America in a very specific and hard way. Rural residents are more vulnerable to serious infection and death.
Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack's comments came at his first post-confirmation news conference.
The Rural Policy Research Institute's report suggested that the infection rate was roughly 13%, between 13 and 14% higher in rural areas than in urban centers.
The 41 projects are part of Rural Development's Community Facilities Program, which funds a wide variety of essential community services in rural areas with population of 20,000 people or less. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Elsewhere in the headlines today, thanks to a new campaign launched by the Kansas Beef Council, consumers are encountering checkoff-funded advertising now through their connected TV devices. Scarlett Higgins says that some of the networks airing the commercial are Food Network, ESPN, Fox, and CBS.
The new innovative campaign features the Checkoff-funded and Kansas-produced One Simple Ingredient commercial that promotes how nutrients found in beef fuel student success and highlights that, unlike alternative proteins, beef has just one ingredient, beef. The connected TV platform was chosen by the Kansas Beef Council because research shows an increasing number of consumers are shying away from cable and satellite television packages, opting instead for streaming services that can be accessed through smart TVs or internet-connected devices like Roku, Apple TV, and others. While such devices have increased in popularity among all demographics across the U.S. in recent years, the preference of eliminating cable and satellite TV is stark in the 18 to 29 age demographic, where fewer than 33% have a cable or satellite subscription. In addition to reaching a key target audience, connected TV is much more cost-effective than traditional television advertising, which means the Beef Checkoff investment can reach consumers more efficiently. The new campaign has been running for almost 2 weeks and has been seen by more than 20,000 households throughout Kansas and the Kansas City metro area. For more information on the One Simple Ingredient campaign and other demand-building activities being conducted by the Kansas Beef Council, visit kansasbeef.org/beef hub. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
And that's a glance at today's agricultural news headlines for you. A couple of items to remind you about. We do provide this broadcast in podcast form for you, should you not be able to listen to it during the regular broadcast hours on any given day. You can find that posted regularly at agtoday.net, not only for the current day, but for days past, going quite a ways back. Should you want to re-listen to any of our pieces here, you can do so by going to agtoday.net. At that same site, you can arrange for an automatic download of the podcast to your mobile device on the platform of choice there, and the instructions for doing so to subscribing can be found right there at agtoday.net. We would certainly encourage you to take full advantage of that if you haven't done so already. As mentioned, we'll have a different form of Stop, Look, and Listen for you coming up in just a few moments. For K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven is going to fill us in on something that's been in the works for quite a while now and has finally come to fruition. We'll tell you what that is next on Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. And for our weekly installment of Stop, Look, and Listen, a departure from our normal format here. What once was an idea has now become reality, and we're going to tell you about it. In studio for the first time in over a year because of the pandemic, Gus Vanderhoeven has joined us. And as you know, Gus is a former landscape and environmental horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension. Weekly, he has shared his thoughts on life in rural Kansas on Stop, Look, and Listen since the mid-1970s, Gus. And what we're telling folks today is that you have compiled countless scripts from this program into a book. Before we get into that, the background of Stop, Look, and Listen, that will help folks understand what the book is all about.
Okay, you know, before your time, it was Paul DeWeese. I came here in April 1st, very appropriate, 1974. And as I started to work with the county agents, the people of the state, I learned and listened to them and heard several times apologies made for the state of Kansas. And I didn't understand that. Now, just think about it. Here I come to Kansas from the east, originally Dutch, lived in Australia. Okay, I'm in Kansas. I chose to come to Kansas. And people are apologizing for the state. I did not get it, Eric. They, when I asked them, said, well, we are so plain. We're not like other states. And that's how it started. I got mad that people apologized for the state of Kansas and didn't see how beautiful the state was.
So, around 1976, you and Paul DeWeese launched this series of weekly vignettes on various aspects of Kansas, which you called Stop, Look, and Listen. It remains so titled to this day. And from then to now, you've amassed how many features?
I counted last evening. Just figure out how many years that is, 45 or plus years, and how many weeks we have in a year. Once a week we're on the air. I got more than 2,000, something like 2,200 on file. And from that, after many people in the state, Gus, do you ever write a book? I had no time. Right. And maybe with the coronavirus, be as it may, I had more time, and with a fantastic editor, I was able to pull a book together in a couple of months.
Let's talk about it. It is entitled, appropriately enough, Stop, Look, and Listen. This is Life in Kansas. And what you've done with the help of family and friends, you say, Gus, has gone through all of those 2,000-some scripts from all the years past and picked out select features that you wanted to include here.
Yeah, my daughter, Talina, was a tremendous help initially, as was my son, Guido, who said, Pops, you got to get it done. Talina sat down and started to sort through the many we had and put them, the ones she thought really were touching on Kansas and on other situations which were daily life. Mm-hmm. And from that, we finalized it to more than 100, and they are in the book form now, which, I'll be honest with you, it's a very interesting feeling to have between covers, what you spoke about. They come from well long ago to recent.
It's worth acknowledging here, Gus, that you did not compile this book to sell a book. You compiled it to share your long-standing observations on Kansas.
That's correct. It was not the book per se. Writing a book, you don't get rich, unless you're Michener or a Follett or a Harry Potter writer. Now, she did very well. No, that was not the intent. My intent was, one time, to let Kansas see this is a state to be proud of and to take care of it. We should take care of our state. It's home to all of us, and we should appreciate it. And people ask me, how do you come up with a topic each week? It's no problem if you stop, look, and listen to people and keep your... Sometimes it is a beautiful sunset, or it is a sunrise. That is what created the book, my reactions to Kansas, and seeing what I thought people should see, and I talk about it. Simply talk about it. The funny thing is, the few people who have started to read the book seem to be happy about it, and that makes me happy. The big thing is, does it resonate? And from what I hear, it seems to resonate.
So it is available now on a leading online book outlet, soon at select retail outlets. What we're asking folks, Gus, to do, if they're interested in knowing more about the book, they can contact either you or yours truly.
Correct.
Via email.
Via email. That's a tough one.
We'll give it to them. But the genesis of this goes back quite some time. The idea has been building over the years, and it's likely a good feeling to know that it's finally happened.
It's a very good feeling. I feel happy about it. It's done. And at this stage in my life, it feels like a completion.
And well done it is. If you'd like to know more about the book, Stop, Look, and Listen, This is Life in Kansas, you can contact Gus via email at this address, gvanderh, that's GVANDERH, at ksu.edu. Or you can contact us here at the network, agguy, AGGUY, at ksu.edu. Congratulations, Gus, on a project long in the making and successfully completed.
Thank you, Eric, and do not forget you're part of it. You gave the introductions and the ending.
Gus Vander Hoeven, former landscape and environmental horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension, and, of course, the weekly presenter of Stop, Look, and Listen right here. Once more, to find out more about the book, give yours truly a shout via email at agguy@ksu.edu. Happy to fill you in. That's our time for today. As always, thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.